Good morning, class. Today we're going to cover the value chain. And if you can begin by going to your Google Drive, opening the file called copy of BA490 Workshop 6, and going to the second slide on that page, you'll see the diagram that describes a firm's activities essentially in two main manners. One is the primary and the other is the supporting activities. So if we start with the primary activities, what do you think might be the first step? When you've decided you need to make a product or service, obviously you need to find the providers of the various raw materials you might need. To make it simple, I'm going to use an example that everyone will be familiar with. So for instance, if we think about a McDonald's hamburger being produced, you'd need the patty and then obviously the meat in order to make the final hamburger. So the sourcing part or the inbound logistics would be getting the patties and getting the hamburgers and then getting them to the facility, right? So it essentially constitutes what's known as buying from your suppliers, okay? Inbound logistics is that process of getting, in this case, the patty and the beef in order to build your product, which is the hamburger that you sell to the consumer. So if you want to think about it in a simple way, I like to think of it as sourcing. So for your specific companies, whatever you're analyzing in terms of, maybe it's a new product from Target or from TJ Maxx, what you're looking at is where did they get the raw materials from in order to produce the product that they're selling? That's really what this first part, inbound logistics, covers. And that's the beginning of the value chain. The value chain overall is essentially a series of stages and steps that actually shows the progression from that raw material that you bought initially through to the final value that's being delivered to the customer. Okay, so each stage of that process is considered an incremental value. That's why it's called part of the value chain, right? So as you complete various steps and stages, providing customer service, let's say at the very end of marketing your products, once they've been purchased, then making sure that they're happy with the service and the products that they were delivered, that is another part of the value chain because it increases the potential for consumers to come back and end up buying more of your products. So it's important to think of these as various stages where you go from essentially having what could be considered useless raw materials because they're not finalized in a product, all the way through to a final product that's sold, and then how you actually take care of the customers after that sale has been completed. So if we go back now, okay, we looked at the inbound logistics, which essentially is like sourcing. Now we're going to the next stage. Okay, so once you have those raw materials, how do you convert them from what are essentially just, different materials, so a patty and a burger, into something that is actually an edible product, so a hamburger, right? So the production side would look at, okay, now that we have these patties and beef, how do we, produce them, package them, make sure that they're refrigerated prior to consumption, whatever the case might be, in order for the product to be produced safely, sanitarily, and, obviously economically. So this step is really, you just think of it as the production stage, right? Operations covers this kind of production stage where you're converting the sourced materials into the product. So it's the next stage of that value chain because at that point you actually do have a final product in most cases, right? And whether it's something as simple as a McDonald's burger that might be sold directly within that same facility, or let's say a sneaker or something else that might be shipped and then, actually sold through a third party in another country, for example, it's all the same because at that point you produced the product that is tangible, viable, and, can be released to the market. So if we look back now, once you've got that product produced and you actually have it ready for distribution, the next logical stage is to actually distribute it. Okay, so if we go back to the McDonald's hamburger example, And you start by thinking about it once it's actually been cooked into a hamburger. That's the end of the road for that product, right? Somebody comes in, they order it, that hamburger's sold. Okay, so there's no real marketing. There isn't a distribution that is required in terms of transporting the product physically to another facility or selling it to a distributor or a wholesaler. You're directly selling it to the consumer. And a lot of service-based companies like McDonald's would be more relevant like that. So if you think of Starbucks, right? If you think of most of the major retailers, right? They're essentially that point of sale is the final kind of point of sale. Okay, so that's one way to look at the outbound logistics. For a product like McDonald's, that's kind of the end of the line. When you look at something like apparel, clothing or sneakers, they're being produced in one country, shipped to another, distributed from there throughout the world, and then they might be sold by a retailer in your local city. So that whole stage of that distribution process doesn't exist with the hamburger because you're selling it directly to the consumer on site. But as you get into more complicated products or products that aren't for immediate consumption, it typically happens that it's going to enter some kind of distribution arrangement in order to be sold. Okay? So really then at that point, it's about marketing and selling. And this is an interesting concept because you'd think that the distribution would cover that. But once you get your product into a retailer, you still need to make sure that the overall product is attractive to consumers, that people are willing to buy it. You have to do all the marketing and selling, even if it isn't being sold through your store. So ultimately, everything in terms of advertising budgets to, getting the right material in front of the right people, promoting the product, and making sure that the in-store awareness of the product's placement is actually facilitating more purchases. All of those issues matter much more at this point because you still need to make sure it gets sold. The distributors are, not going to be buying your products again to sell them if they're not being sold off the actual shelf. So you need to make sure you do that first. Okay? And then you get to the service aspect at the end, which is essentially better known as customer service, right? Where you're providing any kind of after-sales support to the client, which might include, educating them on how to use the product all the way through to, repairing a damaged or broken product or replacing it. So that's kind of the hallmark of how you get repeat business when customer service is exceptional. The rates of retention are much higher, so you're not constantly trying to get new shoppers in, but you'll have a lot of repeat customers. And companies like Amazon have excelled at that. If you think about when you order Prime, let's say, and you get the 2-day shipping, they're always on time. And that's how they get that excellent customer service, because that reduces complaints and, frustrations that customers might have with the company. So when we go now from the primary activities, because they're essentially the real financially producing aspects of the business, over to the supporting activities, what we're looking at is things like the firm infrastructure. So how are all these operations, if we can call the primary activities operations, how are all these operations actually being accomplished? What internal staffing is there, and how is that staffing actually appropriated to make sure that the company produces at the optimum level? So for instance, if you want to think of an example, many firms are now decentralized, right? So a regional McDonald's has a little bit more autonomy over what it needs to do over, being in line fully with corporate. So companies are decentralizing because they're realizing, maybe the McDonald's in Massachusetts needs to offer something, let's say with seafood, because, we're right by the sea. Or, if you're looking at the Southwest, maybe, it needs to be more of some kind of spicy food, so there's all these kind of variations. And major companies are realizing that in order to best cater to local consumers, the infrastructure needs to be designed so that the feedback from the consumers is able to reach the company decision makers. And what I mean by that is, if customers want a certain product altered, modified, whatever it might be, they're able to actually get their opinions heard by the right people. And often it's too difficult to reach the CEO if it's a very centralized organization. So having these smaller regional units that can connect with the consumers and then feed back the findings up to the upper management seems to be a better solution. So that would constitute firm infrastructure. You're looking at how is the company structured in order to deliver and support these primary activities. Okay, so does it focus mainly on, having centralized authority, decentralized authority, many managers? Is it more of a horizontal structure or a vertical, right? And it'll help you understand how the company makes decisions all the way through to how the company can change its course for the future. Human resource management is really taking care of, okay, we have this structure now. Now we obviously have to find the right people. And if any of you have applied for a job in the past, you know that you contact the human resource department because they essentially decide, okay, does this person fit our criteria? Which category did they fit into best? Is so-and-so a better candidate for a technical position or for a sales role? And that's where they're able to fill those gaps and say, okay, we decided that we're going to have this decentralized structure. In order to accommodate that, each manager has to be very, diligent and dedicated and committed and hardworking, because otherwise the system will fail. So then you've got those criteria, and then you have to hire those right managers that fit those roles. So the last two sections essentially cover technology, which is how does the company innovate, and procurement, which is the purchasing process. So what's interesting is the technology department would focus on how new products are built, designing new products and innovations, but also how you can innovate on existing processes, right? So in the case of McDonald's, it's not only creating, let's say, new hamburger recipes, but it's also saying, oh, well, if we implement this new grill technology, we might be able to cut the cost of, cooking by 15% because it only takes 30 seconds as opposed to a minute on the grill. So we're able to turn over twice as many products as well and sell more, right? So technology is both an innovation in terms of actual products and services that you're delivering, as well as in the processes and the way you do the delivery of those products and services. So that essentially constitutes how you go from having the right people under the right structure to develop these new processes once they're familiar with the company, how it works, what it needs to deliver. And then from that, you're able to deduct, okay, now we're at the procurement stage. What do we need to purchase and in order to, create those raw materials to have that whole production process happen again? So if you really think about it, the procurement process, which is the end of the support activity, is also the beginning of the inbound logistics process, which is, you found and identified the raw materials, you purchased them. Now you need to get them into the factory or whatever the setting is in order for them to be produced. So you're starting that cycle essentially from procurement, where you've identified everything you need to buy, then you buy it, and then you put it into the production process to make it your final product or service. So that's how you go through analyzing a value chain. Those are essentially the concepts that you need to think about. If you can put that into your own business and look at, how do they actually do this, you should be able to define, a lot of the key selling points and why they're successful. In terms of, maybe it's something in their innovation process. Maybe they have, a very good firm infrastructure. simple research will, yield a lot of these findings for you. Okay? So good luck, guys. That's your assignment for this week, the value chain, and I'll see you next week.